As Megan said, I'm Rebecca Lamb. I'm president of the AFP Greater Houston chapter, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all, but also I want to give a big thanks to our partners and co-sponsors of CGPH, or I hope I get this right, Charitable Gift Planners of Houston. And also thanks to Brina Bowman-Gonzalez, our VP of Education this year, who's put together this program along with Chris Kasavich, who I am here to introduce. I did want to bring your attention to a couple of announcements in the slides that we've been showing. Very quickly, please, if you are somebody who has been involved with the chapter and you want to increase your involvement or serve in a leadership position, we have board nominations for next year open right now. The deadline is the end of this month, August 31st, so you've got 10 days. So please check out our website at afphouston.org if you want to apply there. And also, I don't know if everyone knew this, but as of a few months ago, our chapter has our very own podcast called The Development Download. You can find it on iTunes and Spotify, thanks to our board member, Lauren Futch, who this has been a pet project of hers, and there's been some really interesting sessions so far, so I encourage you to check it out. Okay, so getting to the session, I am here to introduce Chris Kasavich, CFRE and CAP. Chris has been a professional fundraiser for 19 years now, serving in a variety of positions and nonprofit sectors, including higher education, fine arts, and healthcare. He's currently the Senior Director of Philanthropic Resources for the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. And he manages a team and personally secures major and planned gifts as well to support the mission of ending cancer. Chris earned his CFRE in 2009 and graduated with honors from the University of Houston Bauer College of Business with an MBA in 2010. And he earned his Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy, or CAP, in 2018 from the American College of Bryn Mawr. He lives in Houston with his wife and daughter, who I am sure he has seen a lot of recently. So I will hand it over to you, Chris. Thanks.
Very true, yes. Thank you, Rebecca, and for the kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. It is my delight to be a part of this great joint AFP and CGPH meeting, and my honor to both introduce today's presenter and moderate a Q&A session with him after his presentation. Just so everyone knows, questions will be addressed after the presentation, but if you want to put them in the chat, AFP staff and I will be keeping track of them, or you can just hold on them until afterwards. On to today's session. Taxes, heirs, or charity, those are your choices. And as boomers enter the legacy planning years, they're going to leave trillions to the next generation and the causes they supported during their lifetimes. This is happening, and these individuals are making big decisions now about their legacies and how philanthropy figures in and continues to figure in. So what should we know, and how can we partner with these exceptional donors who have supported us for so long to drive gifts of meaning towards things that continue to have meaning for them, our organizations? It's a complicated question, and thankfully today we have an expert to walk us through it. As the Sallie B. and William B. Wallace Chair in Philanthropy at the American College, Phil Cubeta is responsible for the Chartered Advisor and Philanthropy curriculum. Prior to joining the American College, Phil served as Chief of Staff for the Nautilus Group, a service of the New York Life Insurance Company providing estate business and philanthropic strategies to clients through 200 of the company's top agents. He is a lifelong learner and tireless in his service to others and to our profession. His original training was in English literature at Williams College. He earned his master's in philosophy and psychology at Oxford and further advanced degrees in English language and literature at Yale. And if that wasn't enough, he also holds the Master's of Science in Financial Services from the American College, something I've been looking at, by the way. With regard to his service, just a few examples include he serves on the Plan Giving Advisory Board for the Carter Center, established by Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. He is past president of the North Texas Council for Partnership for Philanthropic Planning. And in 2012, he was, along with Charles Collier of Harvard, author of the terrific Wealth and Families, by the way. If you haven't read it, go to Amazon right after this and buy it. Honored with the Fithian Leadership Award for Advisors in Philanthropy. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, a quick personal note on Phil and the CAP program. 6 years ago, when I joined MD Anderson, I realized I had a hole in my game and I needed to know more about the planned giving side of our profession. I just felt there were things I was missing with regard to building the relationships I should be focused on donor lifetime value, not just closing the next gift. I can attest that the Chartered Advisor and Philanthropy program is the most rigorous and useful training I've received in this profession. It immediately improved the conversation I was having with donors, the depths of those relationships, and my ability to serve both the mission of my institution and the missions of my philanthropists. It's all online, and Phil teaches all of it. Many a night I was at the kitchen table with my headphones in, watching lessons on my iPhone and madly taking notes. There are 3 exams. They are not easy, just as everything worth doing in life should be. Tony Robbins, the inimitable quoter, said, "The purpose of a goal is not to achieve it. The purpose of a goal is who you become in pursuit of it." If you're thinking about the next step in your professional education and you want to set a goal that will make you grow, I encourage you to check out the CAP program at the American College. And that's the end of my infomercial. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Phil. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much. That was the best introduction I've had in a long time, and I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
It was also, best advertorial as well, but I appreciate that a lot. It's interesting having a chance to do this talk. I was described as being an expert, but I think probably the most important fact here is as you get older, and I'm now in that legacy planning demographic, your thinking and your feeling changes. And I hope that some of that comes through to you, how important this work you're doing is for people in my age bracket and older, how essential your role is in completing, our own life journey and doing it in a way that is in line with who we are. I think only you can do that. I think that's a role. Advisors have a big role to play, but so do you. So let's ask about, are you ready for the boomer legacy wealth wave? The agenda is, are you ready? Donor presentation. This is an example of a presentation I've done to legacy donors, and then a discussion. So are you ready? Here's some statistics about the background on this. If you look at where the money is, okay, you can see there's still quite a bit in the silent generation, and that's passing pretty quickly to the boomers. Most of the wealth is in the hands of the boomers. Leading edge boomers, I think, are now like 74, 75. So we're entering our mortality curve, and then you can see Gen X and the millennials. That's the legacy wealth wave. And it's estimated that about 30 trillion, now that's a huge number. Nobody, how do you relate to 30 trillion? But 30% of that, some people say, could go to charities. And it's the largest single wealth wave in history. Now you may think, legacy planning is kind of an afterthought. You get around to it later, but the wealthier the client is, the larger the legacy gift is, but also the larger the legacy gift is in comparison to the annual gift. So for people under 2 million, you can see the legacy gift tends to be just a small multiple, 1 or 2 times the annual gift. But at the higher wealth levels, like $50 to $100 million, it's actually 50 times. The planned gift is 50 times the amount of money that would come in through their typical annual gift. I think this is backed up indirectly by a talk I heard a number of years ago from somebody from Harvard, who was really one of their chief fundraisers. And what she said is that 81% of the time at Harvard, the legacy gift from a donor is larger than all the other gifts the donor has given in a lifetime, the sum total. And that's presumably because they're working with wealthier people at Harvard. Now, I know many of you, when you think about planned giving, you have this feeling, okay, I'm not an expert, I'm not a tax attorney, this is really technical. Most of it actually is not. And I hope the one thing you take away from this talk, it really is not, does not have to be technical. 80 to 90% of planned gifts are simple bequests or something else that can be done with a single stroke of the pen. For example, changing a life insurance beneficiary or changing the beneficiary of an IRA. That's almost all of it. And all the complicated stuff is actually the minor part. Now, we want to target the right donors. And there's been quite a bit of research done on this by Russell James in his book, American Wealth Demographics. And these are some of the highlights. More educated people tend to leave a larger legacy. Those who have more money are more likely to leave it, and it will be bigger. A common sense point, but if they don't have children, legacy planning for charity is going to be top of mind. And obviously also loyal donors and volunteers. And clearly age comes into it. The best legacy prospects are loyal donors of a certain age, say 70 years old to 90 years old. And the process commonly gets serious at 70 to 75. And I can attest to that. I'm in that bracket, and I can tell you it's something I think about probably almost every day. Now, legacies mature at death for the most part, right? And that's 85 to 90 these days for a couple. Now, you may think that there's competition between annual and planned gifts. That's a common misperception. In reality, putting a legacy plan in place is a leading indicator of significant increase in annual giving. So on average, I think it's 78%. It's almost double once that legacy gift is put in place. Once the documents are in place, the annual gift is likely to almost double from there on in, because the donor is making a commitment to your organization. Now, does annual giving and major giving and planned giving compete in another way? You know, I think the more you talk about my life from today to the future to death and beyond, you're having the right conversation. It's one seamless conversation about the life journey. So generally, boomers prefer to give while living. So that when you begin to talk about larger gifts, ultimate gifts, a lot of that's going to come in now. So it's not competing. That conversation can actually drive current giving. I like to think of legacy as completing a stream of payments to accomplish something important. This chart shows when you ask boomers about legacy, meaning moving money to their heirs or moving money to their charity, would they like to move the money during their life or at death? And the blue chunk shows you that primarily they're thinking about doing it while they're alive. So legacy is something you live as well as leave. The mustard slice are people who want to move it all during their lifetime. And the gray says, I'll think about it later, I'll do it at death. This is a major change from my parents' generation, the World War II generation. Now, I want to acknowledge something serious for you to consider as you think about moving more in this direction. There are drawbacks, and these drawbacks are important to you personally, they're important to your supervisor, and they're important to your board. Generally speaking, legacies come in later. Now, they can get started giving today, they can live their legacy, but this is called deferred giving. Also, expectancies are contingent. Now, what does that mean? It means they may go up on your wall as a member of your legacy society because they've made a commitment, but it turns out later the money doesn't materialize. They often change their will in the final 3 to 5 years of their lives. They can't do much else, but they can do that. They get a bad diagnosis, they rethink things. So just because you were in the will 10 years ago does not mean you're in the will now for somebody who's been one of your longest serving friends. So it's contingent. Also, these gifts tend to be restricted to a purpose the donor has in mind, and they're often endowed. Now, why is that? Why is that? Is because this is the last thing I'm going to do on earth, and I don't want to entirely die. I want something to live on after me. I want to be perpetual, and perpetual in line with something I care about. So by putting it into the endowment and just spending the interest, so to speak, for something that will go on forever, I feel like I'm living forever. Now, obviously, that's something of an illusion, but it's a large part of the motivation. So they tend to be restricted. They're also often made not with a checkbook, because this is a percentage of net worth, okay? taxes, charity, children. It can only go in those three places. What percentage? So when you're talking about legacy planning, you're talking about percentages of the entire estate. And typically when it's posed that way, charity, people think of charity almost like an heir. Think about giving as much to a charity as they do to their heirs. But it's often non-cash assets, and those are trickier for you to handle. Things like real estate, rental real estate, collections, bitcoins, you name it. And not only are they restricted, but they may be restricted in ways that are off mission, okay? And that's important to think about as you, as a gift acceptance officer or the gift officer, are in the middle of this. You don't want them to set up a legacy which will fail because it doesn't really fit the organization. And you see that a lot. You see that a lot. It has to be on mission for the organization. It has to be on mission for the donor. And that's a large part of the value you add to the equation. Now, it's also true, these are complex. At the institutional level, they may require gift acceptance policies, gift agreements, gift counting policy, and obviously ongoing stewardship. And they're time consuming. You might have to take time out of your schedule to do this, and that might be not a good idea if you have to raise current gifts. This, I think, is the biggest drawback when you think about deferral. And I'm sure you're feeling this in your organization. You know, nearly 40% of nonprofits in this very recent article say they may be forced to close because of the pandemic. So if you had a choice of $1 today or $1,000 7 years from now when the donor dies, what does your organization want you to be doing? I think one of the morals of this presentation is it's not either or. You can talk about current gifts, major gifts, and planned gifts all in one visit and plant the seeds. So this is an example, I think, of how people would like to be talked to about their legacy. And I call it hitting your legacy home run. Starting at home base, touching all the bases, and bringing it back home. This is a picture of me doing this in Dallas at a health organization, and you can see the people who turned out. You kind of get a sense of the demographic. And I think about that evening a lot. I think about their faces. I think about the stories they told me afterwards. And it was genuinely touching to see how this talk resonated with them, because what's on my mind is on their minds too, in its own way. So think of yourself on that baseball diamond as a fundraiser now at home plate. Think about the home base considerations that matter to people who are older. Home is where we say we, not them. Where we say brother and sister or brethren. It's where we say I, thou. It's where we say dearly beloved. You are playing that part in your best donors' lives. You are close to their heart. You're almost part of their family. Wonderful quotation from Robert Frost. Home is where, when you have to go there, they have to take you in. Many of you are taking in those who have no place else to go. When studies are done of the human brain, they put people in an MRI and they read the brain and they start reciting phrases to people. What they have discovered is that when you talk about legacy, any legacy-related issue, the parts of the brain that fire are right next door to family, right next door to neighborhood. The things we do for love, the things we love. Does not that ring true to you? Isn't that your experience of the nonprofit sector? You are an extension of family. It's about love, much, much more so than it's about money. So how do we open a deeper conversation that gets the donor to connect their story with your story? I was giving a talk on working with the wealthy to a social justice organization, and Michael O'Shaughnessy served on that board. Now he's a Jesuit and he teaches ethics at St. Ignatius College Prep School in San Francisco. And he said to me, you know, Phil, I'm a Jesuit I took a vow of poverty and I've lived up to it. But some of the things you're talking about remind me of the things we talk about in ethics class with the kids. He said, what I like to ask them is, what kind of person do you want to be in what kind of world? And I don't think I've ever heard two better legacy planning questions, two better life questions than those. What kind of person do you want to be in what kind of world? Peter Karoff founded the Philanthropic Initiative, one of the first philanthropic consulting firms, who's also a poet. And this is his book, The World We Want. And in it, these are his questions. He asked very wealthy families like the Amidyars and the Rockefellers to think about their giving and their legacy planning. And here's how he does it. You see, he starts with a blue sky question and then lands on something practical. What is your vision of a better world? What are the conditions needed to realize it? What are the obstacles? Almost like a business plan here. What parts of the vision are realistic? And what ideas, strategies, and plans can make it so? That's where it gets practical. How do we bring your vision of a better world or better community, a better Houston to life? This is Tracy Gary. That's her book, Inspired Philanthropy. She's been a great mentor to me, leader in women's philanthropy. And these are some of Tracy's questions, and I've preserved her language because she's more eloquent than I am. And I'm not sure what every one of these means, but I know they're deep. What would you like to change or preserve in the world? Has past giving reflected your hopes? Now, I'm not positive I know what that means, but I think she's suggesting that sometimes our gifts leave us feeling disappointed. What are the causes behind the issues? If you're concerned about children in poverty, why are there so many of them? What might change the situation? And we're not going to change the world on our own. Who joins you in this work? Your husband, your wife, your partner, your children, your larger family, other people in the community, your nonprofits. Who joins you in the work? And we're not going to get it right all at once. We want to start now. We want to experiment and we want to revise. How will you experiment and revise? This is Jenny Santee. She's written an interesting book on the giving way to happiness. And she asks it this way: who's your giving tribe? Who influences you in your giving? Who do you give with? Joe Breitenecker took over the Philanthropic Initiative when Peter Karoff, you saw earlier, died or retired. And Joe himself died not long after this picture was taken. And he was a good friend, and I miss him a lot. And you can see on his T-shirt a Harvard crest. He went to Harvard, and then he joined the Philanthropic Initiative. Many of us in philanthropic planning and in financial planning and estate planning have been told it's a good idea to get the donor or the client to write a mission statement, a family mission statement. Well, that takes a lot of time. Some of us consider it a little bit hokey. We're not businesses. We're not running a corporation. Joe had a way of cutting to the chase, right to the heart of the matter. And this is his question. If your family had a crest like this Harvard crest, what would be your motto? I want 2 words, just 2 words that you actually live by. This is Jay Steenhuisen. He has a master's in divinity, has a long-time career both doing plan giving and also teaching plan giving. He was actually head of CGP, Charitable Gift Planning Association, at one point. He's also worked for Harris Bank and other for-profit organizations, worked for Brown University raising money. He likes to ask people, I know this would work in Houston. I lived in Dallas for a long time. This is going to work for you. Ask the donor, do you recognize any element of luck, blessing, or grace in your success? Now, if the client says no, like Frank Sinatra, I did it my way, you probably don't have much of a philanthropic prospect or a legacy prospect, but almost all of us recognize that others played a part in our success, and many of us would like to send the elevator back down to those who are less fortunate. This guy is named Tom Tierney. He founded a massive philanthropic consulting group called the Bridgespan Group. He came out of Bain Consulting, which is one of the biggest for-profit consulting groups. His partner at the top of that organization was Mitt Romney. And I had a chance to interview Tom about a book he wrote called Give Smart, great book. And I read his resume, and I could not believe how successful he was by the age of 35. He and Romney were running Bain, and Tom was 35. At about 40, Tom left to found a nonprofit consulting firm, a philanthropic consulting firm. He does not own it. He has no equity, and it's a nonprofit. And I asked him, why would you do this, Tom? I mean, you could have run for president like your partner. Why did you do this? And he kind of pulled back a little bit, and he didn't know if I was asking him a trick question. And he paused and he said, I'll tell you, it's a fair question. I found that I woke up every night with the same question running through my brain. If I've only got 10 more years to live, will this have been enough? And he decided it wasn't. And he wanted to do something directly for the benefit of others. Many of your hard-boiled business people like Tom have got that side to them if you ask. This is Parker Palmer. He's written a series of books kind of chronicling his own life journey. This is one he wrote at midlife, A Hidden Wholeness, The Journey Towards an Undivided Life. And he says, all of us are on a quest. And I am willing to bet if I sat down with each of you one by one in a relaxed environment, we had a chance to talk, some days more than other days, some points in your life more than other points, you are thinking about aligning your soul and your role, and you're asking, am I doing all I can as a person, as a professional, as a human being to align what I do with who I am? And philanthropy can be a way to do that. Here's a midlife question. Jill, when you were younger, were there things you want to do in life that you've not yet done? And how could we get back to those while we still have time? So let's say she says, I'm running a company here, and it's a PR company, and we're doing really well. But what I really wanted to do all along was be a musician. I wanted to be a concert pianist, and my parents kind of pushed me into making more money and all that. But I really miss music, and I'd like to get back to that if I could. But I'm way too old to be a concert pianist. There might be a way to connect your organization to that story with a conservatory, a scholarship, helping somebody else to do it. Now, this is probably one of the best fundraisers ever. Charles Collier, he was the chief philanthropic officer at Harvard, extremely successful, wrote a great book, Wealth and Families. These are some of his questions. And particularly for those of you who are financial advisors, tax, legal, legacy planning kind of advisors in the audience, this is a call to conscience. What principles have guided your legacy planning to date? And I kind of know the answer because I worked in legacy planning in a financial firm for a number of years, and I know the motives that we assumed the client had. We plan for the following motives: fear, losing your money; greed, wanting more money; and control, controlling your money after death. Those are the primary motives that people plan for in law offices today. And it's a shame, because although those motives are very important, they do not exhaust the ideals of your clients. So when you raise questions like this, you're providing an essential service to the best planned clients in town, donors in town, because their advisors are not putting it on this level, and you can. Why? Because your organization is devoted to ideals, because you yourself have devoted your life to ideals. Think about the sacrifices you yourself have made because of your ideals. You have a right to ask the question, what principles have guided your legacy plan to date? What are you up against with your children? The reason that's important, the default estate plan done by attorneys, CPAs, done by insurance people, is to move the most possible money to heirs. And yet, when you think about it, that may not be the right amount, particularly for those who have a lot. I'm reminded of a story by a very successful estate planning attorney who said, my practice changed. Once I had a client who was worth $100 million. He said, I helped him move all 100 to his child, his son, and his son was dead within 2 years of alcoholism. He drank himself to death with the money. So what are you up against with your children should guide you in your legacy planning. How wealthy do you really want them to be? Do you want them to be so wealthy that they can rely on your money rather than making their own? These are difficult, difficult conversations. Advisors seldom have them at depth. And to the extent you can open these questions, you're doing a service. This is Deanna Ewan. She joins me now in the CAP program, Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy. She's a professor at the college. And when I was discussing these questions with her in a restaurant in San Francisco where she lives, she said, well, those are good questions. Here's one that I ask my donor friends. Were there things you want to do that your father said you can't? Interesting question. And when I show this to many audiences, they say, well, that's because she's from a traditional culture. She's Vietnamese, and that's true in their society. I'm not so sure that isn't true in Houston and Dallas and around the country as well. When we talk about passing on family values, are we talking about passing on the parents' values and imposing them on the children? Are we talking about helping the children to find their own? Now, people disagree about this point. All I'm trying to say to you is that heirs too are wondering, how do I live into my own values? And philanthropy can be a way to do that. This is Verio Philanthropy, two women who founded it, Lindsay Matouche, they're in St. Louis, and Melinda McElhaney, and they've got some great questions. Do you have any debts of gratitude? I'll bet if I sat down with you, you would have a long list. What would your friends say is your soapbox? What are you on about? What is your mission? What is your cause? You're giving to a lot of organizations. Where could you sacrifice some breadth to achieve more depth? Beyond yourself and your family, in your planning, is there anything else in the world on which you'd like to have a positive impact? And implicitly, you're asking through us. This is Sharna Goldsecker. This is her book, Generation Impact, How Next Gen Donors Are Revolutionizing Giving. And she's an heiress. I think she's probably 3 or 4 generations deep in a internationally significant family fortune. And she's thinking about legacy from the standpoint of somebody who's receiving one, who has received one down through the chain of generations. She's asking, what legacy have I inherited? Not just what am I going to leave, but what have I inherited from my family and from my community? And how does that legacy, what I have received, inform who I am and how I see the world? How does it inform my identity? Am I simply a member of this family, or am I an individual? Things to think about when you're working with inheritors. Now, this is Bruce Dabowski. He runs a philanthropic consulting firm specializing in family philanthropy that binds a family together. And he points out that sometimes in family philanthropy, the emphasis is on family, and sometimes the emphasis is on impact, on philanthropy. And typically there's a balance. So sometimes when you're talking about philanthropy with people, it's about the impact they're going to have on the world, and sometimes about the impact philanthropy will have in binding the family together and passing on family values, making them closer. This is Coventry Edwards Pitt. She's Chief Wealth Advisory Office at Ballantine Partners, and that's a family office in Boston. And that's her book, Aged, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. And these are good questions for your legacy age donors, people like me and older. Has your relationship to wealth changed as you've gotten older? Well, good golly, yes. When you're older, when you're younger, it's all about getting more. When you reach the point where you have enough, the conversation changes. And you reach a certain age, it's about passing it on and doing good with it. Have you evolved in how you use your wealth? How so? And what's been the most rewarding use you've made of money as you've gotten older? And very often it's going to be about giving rather than spending. Parker Palmer, again, now in the final 10 years, maybe 20 years of his life, he founded an organization that teaches vision and values kind of in Quaker circles, teaches people to reignite their passion for their profession in kind of Quaker circle conversations. And he's now having to give up that organization, retire basically. And it's extremely difficult. It's very difficult for older, successful people to do that. It's like giving up everything you've been. These are his first two questions. He brought the first two questions into a Quaker circle, where the tradition is that when you're stuck, you bring your questions to the circle, and the circle tells you nothing, but they listen until you hear the inner voice, what they call the inner teacher. He brought these two questions into the circle. What must I let go of my life work? What can I still hold on to? Not much. And what came to him in that moment was the final question. And what can I still give myself to completely? And that's the work of legacy. And that's the work you can facilitate through volunteering, board service, and giving. Rabbi Mordecai Liebling teaches Torah outside Philadelphia in a seminary, Jewish seminary. He also teaches fundraising. And this is his question. Your last will and testament is your final teaching. What do you want it to say? To me, that's the true prophetic voice. That's the level at which these legacy conversations need to happen if they're to be appropriate. Your legacy plan is your final teaching. What do you want it to say? Memories fade, remembrances remain. I made these points, the workshop you saw, the symposium you saw in the first slide about the audience. And an attorney came up to me with his wife at the end and said, we were journeying around in England and we saw a bench that was really on this theme. This was inscribed on the bench, and it seems very appropriate for what you're talking about. So I wanted to find a picture of that bench so I could share it with you. They inscribed memories fade, remembrances remain. I wasn't able to find it, but I did find this. In memory of Roger, who hated this park and everybody in it. So, there are different kinds of legacies. Not all are motivated by love. Some may be motivated by malice. I don't know. So as you think about the baseball diamond, to maximize legacy, you've got to touch every base. So those of you who are advisors in the audience, you're playing first. If you're the catcher at home plate, as you are as a fundraiser, it's good to get the donor to touch first base first. On first base, we ask, how much is enough for us as donors? How much do we need for ourselves? Now that's financial planning. It's retirement planning. It's investment planning. It's life insurance planning. It's all the things you need to do to get a financial plan done. And until they do that, the gifts to you are going to be kind of modest. Certainly lifetime giving is going to be modest because they're concerned they may not have enough for themselves. I saw Ted Turner interviewed, you probably know him from his giving to the UN on mine clearance. He, one of the wealthiest people in the country, if not the world. He's given away billions. He was interviewed on TV. I saw the interview. At the end of the interview in a restaurant, the interviewer asked him, Tom, you've been really generous. What's next for you with your giving? And he pulled back like he'd been stung by a bee. And he said, look, wait, I'm down to my last billion. So no matter how much a person has, what they think of as being enough has got to be worked on. And that's where advisors come in. So until they do the first base work, they really can't do just the second base. Now, second base, also staffed by advisors, is how much is enough? Not too much, not too little. What's the right amount for heirs? Now, that's a very difficult question. And I think the best way to address it is a thing that the guy who invented this, his name is Scott Fithian, called the final spending spree. And it's basically, you can do this with a legal pad, make a list of what you want the kids to get. Do you want to buy them a house? Do you want to buy them two houses? Do you want to make a down payment on a house? Do you want to buy them a vacation house, an education fund, a retirement fund? Do you want to leave them enough so that they keep putting money into the fund they can retire? Or do you want to leave them enough so they can retire the day you die? Do you want to buy them one car, two cars, three cars? What kind of car? How expensive? Do you want to buy them jewelry? Do you want to buy them private? Most families reach a point where they say, no, I could do more harm than good if I've got 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, 40 million. Wealthier clients will say almost always, enough is enough when you add it all up. And that tends to be much less than what they have. So that brings you to third base. You start with what they have. You subtract what they want heirs to get, and what's left over is the third base money. So some people that I respect and like a lot call this philanthropy by the subtraction method rather than passion, and that's true. It's how advisors think. It's very cold-blooded. You can call it philanthropy by the subtraction method or philanthropy from the leftovers. But the truth is, until they take care of themselves and take care of the kids, what they're going to be giving to you is minor. So what do you have? What do you want the heirs to get? What's going to be left over? Now, those are calculations you can't do, particularly because you don't have access to the balance sheet, but your advisor partners, your advisor friends can. And you can encourage the donor to run the bases with advisors. So really what we're doing here is we're computing their giving capacity, their charitable capacity, and it brings us to charitable tools. So on third base, we do talk about how to structure your legacy money. You don't have to be an expert in this. It comes much later in the process. You have to be an expert in the human heart and connecting that legacy story to your nonprofit. All this can be done by your plan gift officer if you have one, or it can be done by the client's own advisors. This, in a way, is more or less commodified planning. Anybody who's got certain advanced credentials can do this. Don't worry about it. Just set it up by helping the donor run the first, go from home to first to second to third. And this is the place where you play a crucial role as the catcher at home plate. Because think about this now. Think about this if you're an advisor. Think about this if you're a gift officer. Most legacy planning in which advisors are involved strands the runner on third. I've worked with advisors most of my career, and I promise you this is correct. It gets stranded on third because once the advisor has it in that CRT or donor advised fund or foundation or whatever the gift structure might be, the advisor feels, hey, my work here is done. I'm not going to select a charity for the donor. That's not my problem. So the money tends to be stranded at third, and that's a tragedy. We want to bring that money now home to you at home plate. These are questions only you can answer. When that money is freed up on third, these are the questions the donor is probably looking to ask you and doesn't quite dare. You know, you're talking about Ted Turner. I'm not Ted Turner. My potential gift is big to me. It's maybe a third of my net worth. Is it big to you? If I give you that much money, what will I see for the money? What will be accomplished? How do we know the money I'm giving you won't be wasted? What impact will we achieve? And what kind of reporting will we get back? Can we meet the program champion who's going to do something with our money? Will we get recognition? Can we memorialize a loved one or ourselves? Will we get a gift agreement? You know, and in the end, what good is going to come of it? Will it all really matter? And finally, you get to the issue of timing. Do you want to hit a home run standing up, or do you want to slide in feet first? And when I use that line and look at an audience full of people, they know exactly what I mean. And most of us would rather hit a stand-up home run, be there to get the glory, set an example for our children, and get up and do it again. But worst case scenario, you hit your home run sliding in feet first. If you like the way this played out, you like this thought process, this is a book you can get for about $15, $16, The Legacy Spectrum. And Mark Weber, who's a good friend of mine, has put all his worksheets online, including the one about the final spending spree that you saw earlier. So that's it. I hope that it has led you to see how important these questions are for people like me and how critical you are to the conversation. Because in my experience, advisors are reluctant to raise these deeper issues of meaning and purpose and love and life and death. And you have equal standing with advisors, perhaps better standing for these conversations, because these donors have been loyal to you for years and years and years, and you are near and dear to their heart. So I really hope you will be willing to step forward into some of those conversations, not only for, for your organization, for the community, certainly for the people your organization serves. So thank you. And with that, I'll open it up for any conversation, questions, anything you want to ask.
Awesome. Phil, thank you so much. I felt like I was back getting my cap again. That was terrific. We do have a few questions. First and foremost, the world has changed since March, but the transfer of wealth is still going to occur. What are your thoughts on effective engagement of boomers in the COVID era? How willing are they to pivot in their means of communication? Are they still willing to have these discussions? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm hearing from people who are doing it that they actually are willing to have these conversations long distance, and it certainly saves time and trouble as far as setting up the meetings. I think the other thing that I was reminded of going through this talk again, Russell James, who was quoted several times, talks about really about how older people think about mortality. Okay. It's a very, very difficult topic to address head on. There are three options, really. You don't die at all. That's tolerable. You go to heaven. That's tolerable, but it's uncertain. Or you can live on symbolically through other people, live on through the organizations and your family. He points out that if you approach the topic of death head on, people shut down. They shut down. So on the one hand, on the other, on the one hand, people my age, we're thinking, hey, we might have another 15 or 20 years. We may have another 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. Mortality is looking us right in the face. So you can't talk so much about, it's too frightening. But if you talk about it indirectly in terms of what can live on, I think there's probably never been a better time for having those conversations. If, I've seen studies on the words like legacy or wills, it's going through the roof on Google because people my age are recognizing, hey, we better get our final affairs in place.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. Very good. You're talking with a very diverse audience of fundraisers. Houston's a very generous city. Lots of big shops, small shops. Many of whom the people you're talking to are the only person in their shop doing fundraising. That may be of one of 3 or 4 of the hats that they wear.
Right.
You touched on this, how this can't be either or.
Yeah.
Respecting Pareto's principle, can you touch on 1 or 2 of the key things that they should be doing in the plan giving arena, the ones with the biggest bang for the buck?
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing I would probably do, and this is more of a counsel of prudence, I would ask myself, how does my supervisor feel about this? What are my metrics telling me? And how does my board feel about it? And if you get too far out ahead of your organization, you could be in a bind. So I think I'd be looking for opportunities to work with older people who are thinking about legacy, but take advantage of this thought about bringing the money back home during your lifetime. Keep it a little bit simpler. Talk about the effect the money can have during their lifetime, completed at death. But with the emphasis on and I think really and truly most boomers would rather have that lifetime conversation, talk about death anyway. So they're not mutually exclusive. It gets you into the area that some people call the ultimate gift, the biggest gift of a lifetime, which can be done with a warm hand, not a cold, dead hand.
Love that. Very well said.
Yeah, and I think
my final question, then I'll hand it to David to wrap up. This is a joint AFP and CGPH call. So you touched on major gifts, you touched on plan giving. There are major gift officers and plan giving officers on the call. Even in some of the best shops, these groups are often very siloed and separated. How can the two work better together?
Well, that's a huge question. I mean, first we create the problem, then we look for the solution. I think the dividing of plan giving officers or gift planning officers into different categories with different metrics and different parts of the process does make it difficult. And I think the other issue here is, as you saw in the talk, a lot of this work has got to be done by the client's advisors. In other words, you can't work with them on their estate plan, can't work with them on their financial plan, but until they do it. So I think teamwork across our silos and across our roles is absolutely mission critical. And again, I think a lot of this is actually to some degrees over any given gift planning or major gift officer's head. A lot of it's going to depend on your metrics, right?
Sure.
Who gets credit for the gift, and as depressing as that is. But I do think the opportunity to think about how can we better serve the person in front of us by having a richer conversation, no matter what our professional role is. You know, if you think about it, when you walk into somebody's living room or meet them online and you're having a chance to have a conversation, there's a point at the beginning, which is neither inside nor outside the professional interview. It's kind of the time we have a cup of coffee and you have a little small talk. I think of some of these conversations as living there, where you're talking to them as one human being to another. And when you can discover what's in their heart to do during their life and or at their death, it doesn't really matter what your role is. You can find a way to get it done.
I love it. Very well said. Phil, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. David, I'll hand it off to you to wrap up.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Phil. And Phil, thank you so much for sharing with us today and teaching us about the human heart. So much of the gift planning is finding that human heart. Thank you so much. I'm David Starnes, president of the Charitable Gift Planners of Houston this year, and it's just a great opportunity to, again, Phil, have you with us. And it's also been a great opportunity for the Charitable Gift Planners and the Association of Fundraising Professionals to partner together, to work together, to bring one of the best in the gift planning industry to Houston, Texas, and to help educate all of us fundraisers. So thank you so much again, Phil. And it's been a great pleasure to be with you today, partner with AFP. And as always, it just say, everyone have a great weekend, be safe, be healthy. And again, Phil, thank you so much. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you.